Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and I have some quick impressions for you about Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game. Because this is one of those legendary games that people thought we were never going to get to play again, because after it went up on the 360 and PS3, it got taken offline and there was no way to get it for years, but Ubisoft have finally seen fit to release it. After it's been like half a decade at the very least. So is it any good? Eh. It's alright, I guess. Has a lot of problems. Want me to tell you why? So, just FYI, haven't read I assume the comics, haven't seen the movie. This is all I know of this franchise, and this has basically no story whatsoever, except you like a girl, but you have to go and beat up her 7 ex-boyfriends for some reason, at least one of which is a chick. There might be a trap in there, you can never know. And so, you go through these weirdly long beat-em-up arenas, beat the crap out of people, level up, and eventually defeat the boyfriends in boss fights. Incredibly simple as a brawler. And the thing about brawlers is that while they generally rely on having really pretty stages, a lot of enemy variety, the one thing they really need to get right is the moment-to-moment gameplay. The right feel of hitting things to destroy them. The right feel of just getting the punches and the kicks right in order to really make it feel like a satisfying brawler. Does Scott Pilgrim do this? Yes and no. It does do a pretty decent job of having enemies visibly react to being hit. They can tend to fly all over the place. And when they do, it's satisfying enough to watch. But there are a lot of downsides that come with the way Scott Pilgrim does things. Now, most beat-em-ups have varied characters that often have different movesets, different unlockables, and just a difference in gameplay style that makes it worthwhile to run through the game again and again and again with different characters because they play in different ways and therefore the game feels different every time. Scott Pilgrim doesn't do this because despite the fact that all the characters look different, and they do all have different special moves that are bound to the left bumper, for whatever reason, they all have basically the same moveset. You get the same set of punches, kicks, and just general extra unlockable moves you get as you level up. Because the more dudes you beat up, the more you level up, the more moves you get. So as a result, the game feels really repetitive. And I played through the first stage with 4 of the 6 characters they include in the game. I played through with Scott, I played through with Knives, I played through with the girlfriend, Ramona, and I played through with, I think it was Wallace or something. It's a guy who was added in like the game's DLC. And they did look different. All of their animations were different. It wasn't exactly the same look. But gameplay-wise, you couldn't tell the damn difference. So I found myself getting really bored really quickly because all of the characters were exactly the same. Just in general moveset. As I said, there is like a special move you can use with gut points that you can use to do damage to everyone on the map, at least with Scott. It's different for everyone. There's this other one that puts out like a cyclone in front of you that does like 30 damage. I can't remember what the other 2 are because I never used them that I played. But those are different. And as I said, the animations are different, but the characters are otherwise the same. Which is really annoying when it comes to the game's XP system, because every single character has their own individual level that they all go along the same path on, and all unlock mostly the same moves. Now, at level like 15 and 16, which is the game's like penultimate level and ultimate level, so you can't go any higher than 16, they do have what they call tech abilities, which might have the ability to be completely different from one another, but all of the rest are the same across every single character. So, I don't know if they get like slightly defined in the way they work with those special moves as they go on, but I wasn't about to play the game for 5 hours to find out. It took me about 2.5 hours to get to the 4th stage, although I did have to step away from the computer a bit, and I did have to play through the initial stages a couple of times with the other characters. Let's just say 1.5 to 2 hours, but I still wasn't going to play like 1.5 to 2 hours for every character to see if they got any different as time went on, because the move lists looked exactly the same and it wasn't great. It's also not helped out by the way that the game handles its stat points, because This game actually has stat points, but you don't get them for leveling up in not Retro City Rampage, in River City Ransom style, also known as the Kunio-kun game that everybody knows about. At least everybody, that is, people who know about these sorts of things. In those games, you get money off defeated enemies, you use that to buy food, and food gives you stat points. They've brought that over wholesale into Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and honestly, it's really unsatisfying, because enemies start taking a lot less damage unless you have successfully leveled up all your stats as you go on in the game. So that 100 health bar that you start out with isn't going to help you much. That 100 guts power that you start out with isn't going to help you much. And enemies will slowly start taking less damage to the point where you'll only be doing 1 or 2 damage per hit. So every enemy feels like a crawl by the time you get to stage 4 of at least 6. So it ends up being really frustrating because you have to be constantly going back to these little shops that they leave in the level, buying food, and seeing what stat points it gives you. Because they don't even tell you what stat points it's going to give you. It's just a random combination of health, gut points, or your 4 stats, which is your strength, your defense, which is your health, and there's these 2 others, which I honestly can't remember for the life of me, but I think one influences gut points. So you end up in this position where you're constantly going back and trying out the same food, thinking, I really hope, or trying out some foods, thinking, oh, I hope there's a strength food in here somewhere, and then you end up getting nothing but defensive food, and you turn into a little bit of a tank, but at the same time, you kind of just have to deal with the fact that you're going to be weak on strength until you end up finding a shop that does let you do that. You can go back and play previous levels in order to spend your money and then exit to the menu once you're done, but that seems so unnecessary. Why not just give me the option to do it in the world map? It's obvious that you can move back and forth between the individual levels. Why not let me go to the individual stores in those levels as well? But no, it's just weird, if I'm being honest with you. It feels like there are so many more ways they could have streamlined this and had it work out better, but they just didn't. And as a result, it kind of feels like a grind, because as I said, every time I ended up getting through one fight, I found myself making a mad dash back to the nearest shop in order to spend the money I just earned on grinding up things. And as a result, the gameplay started to get a fair bit repetitive. Because it's the same moves, it's relatively the same enemy composition. I mean, they do introduce some new enemies from time to time, but the base enemies you'll be fighting throughout the game, at least up to stage 4, pretty damn similar. You'll be seeing the same dudes over and over again for a good long while. And it gets, again, frustrating as a result. And while that's not too bad, the one thing that really annoys me about this is the way it handles its enemy AI. Now, 2D beat-em-ups like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World and and the games that it was inspired by, think Final Fight, think Streets of Rage, think something along those lines, have you getting your enemies on the same plane as you in order to attack you, and then they'll all close in and try and attack you at once. This game is really bad about that. It'll often spawn like 10 dudes in every single direction, and make it really hard for you to attack one without another one immediately coming up behind you and doing some damage to you. This is made worse by the fact that you've got very little in the way of maneuverability, at least early on. You do get access to a block, which is highly recommended that you use, but again, as soon as you let go of that block, they're going to be more than happy to swarm you and attack you. You do also have access to a dodge roll, but you don't get that until you're like level 8 or something, so you do need to put in a fair amount of effort to get that. It just kind of feels like they cripple you early on, to be honest with you. But as I was saying, there is also a sidestep move that you have by double tapping up or down on the D-pad to get you off their plane. But at the same time, they'll just immediately follow you up. And this includes homing attacks. So you can wait for a guy to start like his charge attack from the other side of the screen and double tap up twice to get out of the way, and he'll still home in on you and beat the crap out of you without even trying. And there are a couple of enemies which are guilty of this. Some that aren't, but frankly one is too many, and it just makes it really annoying trying to avoid everything that the enemies throw out at you, because there's just very little in the way of maneuverability to make it work. You don't have that much in the way of getting out of the way of 10 dudes who have decided to surround you. You kind of just have to be constantly like hopping back and forth, getting aerial kicks in and waiting for thrown objects to go your way, because this game's physics is a little weird, and it can be really satisfying sometimes and really annoying other times. Like, when you manage to uppercut a dude into the air, then jump up into the air, punch him against the wall so that he's being juggled up, and then landing and then doing another massive uppercut as he comes down and sending him back flying, that's pretty satisfying, and the game does actually award you for that kind of play by giving you more money to pick up as a result. It's not much, but every little bit counts, right? But then, with all the thrown objects around that you can pick up and use as weapons or just throw them at enemies, they have this tendency to be affected the same way, where if they get hit with anything, they'll get thrown all over the place too. So you might end up in the middle of like 10 thrown objects through no fault of your own. One guy will throw something which will bounce off something, which will bounce off something, which will hit you, which will knock you back into the wall. Another object will come in and hit you. Then you'll fall on the ground, and the object that was thrown at you in the first place will also bounce off the wall and hit you again when you're on the ground. And it drives you insane. So it kind of balances out, I suppose, but it's still really annoying when it comes down to everything else as well. Like, you've got 6 dudes around you, a ton of objects that you can't guarantee the physics behaviors of, and you just don't know whether or not you're going to be able to get out of a fight. Especially when you've got low stats, and you don't realize that the game expects you to go into a shop and just be constantly munching away at food. It does tell you this in the how to play, but this is a brawler. I feel like there should be an easier way around this, especially since leveling up doesn't actually give you any stats. You'd think that would be a good way to diversify the characters, you know? Because you think to yourself, well, if they made it so Scott did more damage as you leveled up, and then if they did, like Ramona gave her more defense, and then gave another character more wisdom points or whatever it is that gets your guts meter going as you level up, that'd be a good way to make them feel different while at the same time giving you the opportunity to round them out with food if you want, or make them excel or whatever it is you like to do. That would be great. Doesn't really work that way though, and I just find it to be very disappointing as a result, because there are so many other ways you could do this and it would be so much better, but this just doesn't work for me. Admittedly, there are a couple of things I kind of like about the gameplay, mainly how you've got your gut points, which is, I think that they call it gut points, I'd be lying if I could remember. It powers your special move on your left bumpers and your right bumpers, which give you things like screen clearing attacks and an attack that'll hit all the enemies around you, but it drains those points. But also, if you die and you've got some of those points left over, you'll be revived without losing a life and you'll have some health back, which might be enough to get you to a shop, or it might be enough just to get you out of a small area and make that one life stretch that little bit further, which is a really neat way of playing on the idea of you know, special abilities taking away your health. There's also the bonus rounds that you get in certain stages that are like hidden behind doors, which are weird, but they're just kind of fun to play, but still not particularly great. There are a few other weird things about this too. Mainly the fact that the PC port is a bit jank. I don't know what problems are the port and what problems are the games, just inherent to the game itself, but there are a lot of weird things going on with this one and I couldn't tell you what the deal is. So, the first thing is that the volume is really low. I don't usually have to stick the volume up this much to hear anything, but I had my volume at max, I had my in-game at max, I had my volume mixer at max, I had my Windows volume at max, still couldn't hear it to save me life, so I couldn't really tell you much about what the game's soundtrack or the sound effects sounded like in the moment, but at least the soundtrack seems to be kind of faithful to the retro games it's clearly inspired by. It does sound like it's working within the limitations of at least the Nintendo Entertainment System or the Super Nintendo, but I'm not a music expert, don't quote me on that, I can't know for sure. But yeah, the sound was just really quiet, for no discernible reason, so I had to turn the volume up in this video by something like 30 decibels, which is absolutely ridiculous. That's the difference between like a city street and a quiet room. It's kind of ridiculous. I don't know if that's the fault of the PC port or not, but it might be. There's also some graphical errors. Mainly you'll be seeing lines across the screen where the background tiles don't quite match up. And I'm playing this in 1080p. It's weird. So, you would think this would be the main way to play the game on a PC monitor. 1080p flat out. There'd be no reason to see as many weird graphical lines across the screen as you do in some of these areas, but they are there, and they're kind of annoying. The game also doesn't support anything other than Xbox 360 pads, which is kind of disappointing, so I ended up running it through Steam in order to get DualSense controller support in there, and that works fine, but honestly, the controller input feels a little bit sluggish no matter what you do. So, it just makes the game feel a little bit slower and a little bit less impressive than I would have hoped. What else is there? The bosses aren't particularly great either. They're just generally, they're bosses, but I've played through like 4 bosses and they all feel like the first boss in a Streets of Rage game. I feel like they should be way more impressive than they are. Oh yeah, the physics! The physics can also go kind of nuts at times, like jumps being 2 times higher than they should be for some reason, throws going into the upper stratosphere, again for no discernible reason. I don't know if that's a thing of the game, or a thing that the way the game wants to do it, or a thing about the way that the game has been ported, but seriously, I don't know why I would want to throw a guy in a high enough angle to make javelin throwers impressed, but yeah. As a result, sometimes when I'm trying to throw enemies to do some crowd control, it just doesn't work for me. Couldn't tell you why. So yeah, overall, honestly, I'm not that impressed. I find it to be a bit of a slog. There is some entertainment value to be had here. The brawling is alright from moment to moment, but the overall repetitiveness of the leveling and the fact that, as far as I can tell, at least 4 of the 6 characters play the same, and when that many play the same, you can think to yourself pretty safely, at least I believe, oh, the other 2 are probably going to be similar as well. The way that the enemies are designed with their AI is not great. They're constantly surrounding you and being annoying. The way the game's stats and level ups work also just kind of basic, and I feel like there are so many different ways that you could have done this that would be better than the way this game decided to do it. The game does have a bunch of extra stuff. You've got your story mode. You've also got a boss rush. There's also a second mode I can't remember the name of. There's a battle royale for 4 players. And there's a 4th mode. I can't remember what it was called. But they do have a dodgeball. That's it, because this is obviously taking some inspiration from the Kunio-kun series. There's also a bunch of video game references, which were kind of neat. And some stuff which I can't help but wonder what the rating of this game is, because one of the bosses comes out of a female toilet with one of the girls, and then the 2 girls start having a cat fight on stage. It's not particularly obvious, but I mean, it's kind of a funny joke. That got a laugh out of me, but honestly, that was probably the most I'd enjoyed the game. The rest of it was just kind of a bit of a bore. Would I recommend it? Not really. A lot of people will say it'd probably be more fun with friends, and I imagine that dealing with this many enemies at the same time, especially in a couple of parts of the game where they put like 20 freaking dudes, might make it a bit easier, but yeah, I'm not into it. I don't really think it's worth the time. There are much better brawlers than this, and was this really the game that we waited like 10 years to get back? 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, I don't know for sure, but yeah, not worth it. This has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all next time.